A man and a woman stand shivering in the shadows of a garden they no longer recognize. Or, if they read it theologically, they assume it is a broad, sweeping promise that eventually, humanity as a whole will triumph over the forces of darkness, begin to tremble and crack. The seed survives through her. A widow lies shivering on the cold stone of a threshing floor in Bethlehem, smelling the dry dust and the crushed barley in the midnight air, asking a man to spread the corner of his garment over her. The seed survives through her. A king paces the roof of his palace, his eyes resting on a woman bathing in the fading light, setting into motion a chain of murder, betrayal, and grief that should have shattered the dynasty forever. The seed pushes right through the dirt of human failure. It travels through the wombs of women who were mocked, women who were barren, women who were outsiders. It travels through the reigns of kings, who burned their own children in the valley of Hinnom. It travels through the dark belly of Babylonian exile, chained in heavy iron, marching through the scorching desert away from home. Every generation is a choke point. Every century is a bronze knife raised over the altar, but the thread does not snap. The bloodline holds. Then, the camera zooms in. The centuries of waiting collapse into a single night in a cave, carved into the limestone of Judea. The heavy smell of animal breath hangs in the damp air. A young girl pushes through the agonizing, blood-stained pain of labor. A baby cries in the dark. The singular seed, promised in the garden, preserved through the flood, guarded in the desert, and hidden in the exile. A collective victory. Millions of descendants marching together to stamp out evil over thousands of years finally takes a breath of cold winter air. The singular Zera. Everything was narrowing down to this exact moment. All the history, all the wars, all the wandering was simply the delivery mechanism for this one life. But arriving in the manger is not the end of the mission, because Paul's grammatical revelation in his letters does not just explain the history of the Old Testament. It unlocks the terrifying, beautiful mechanism of what happens next. If the seed is singular, if the promise was only ever given to one person, then the rest of humanity is entirely locked out of the blessing. We are stranded on the outside looking in. Unless the seed does the one thing a seed was designed to do. But here's the detail that makes Paul's grammatical discovery utterly terrifying. If the word Zera is strictly singular, if the ancient promise was only ever given to one Jewish man, then you are entirely cut off. The entire human race is legally locked out of the blessing of Eden. God made a covenant with Abraham. He promised an inheritance to Abraham and his seed. Singular. One person. Jesus of Nazareth. The inheritance belongs to him. The kingdom belongs to him. The victory belongs to him. No one else qualifies. No one else kept the heavy demands of the law. No one else survived the moral test. But that reading completely misses the architecture of what God is actually saying. If you look closer at the original language, if the story stops at the manger, or even at the miracles, it is a legal nightmare for the rest of humanity. Jesus inherits the cosmos, and we inherit the ash heap. We get the dry dust. We get the exile. We get the cold wind outside the garden gates. You cannot earn your way into an ancient bloodline. You cannot behave your way into a genealogy. You are either born into the family, or you stand in the freezing rain looking through the glass. Paul understands this rigid boundary perfectly. He was a Pharisee. He breathed the dust of the temple courts. He traced his fingers over the thick, scraped parchment of the Torah. He knows that a Greek merchant in Galatia or a Roman soldier in Ephesus has absolutely zero claim to the covenant of Abraham. They have the wrong blood. They have the wrong ancestors. They have the wrong physical markers. This is not a gap you can cross with moral effort. It is an impenetrable vault. But Paul does not stop at the singular noun. He pushes the grammar one step further. He reveals the ultimate loophole in the divine legal code. Because if you cannot earn your way into the bloodline, there is only one way to get the inheritance. You have to become the seed. Resting right at the center of God's sentence is a single, peculiar Hebrew noun. English Bibles usually translate it as offspring or descendants. You have to be absorbed into the singular person who actually holds the deed to the earth. The blessing is not divided up into billions of tiny pieces and handed out to a crowd. The blessing remains entirely singular. To get it, you must be found inside the one man who owns it. But how do you fuse a fractured, dying humanity into a single, perfect heir? How do you place an absolute outsider into the sacred family tree of Judah? You cannot do it while the seed remains intact. You cannot do it while the man is simply walking the dusty roads of Galilee, preaching and healing to bring the outsiders inside. The vessel has to fracture. To break open the bloodline, you have to break open the body. The heavy iron spikes are driven through flesh and deep into rough, splintered olive wood. The sound of the hammer echoing off the stone walls of the city. The sky over Golgotha turns completely black at midday. Thick and suffocating, the singular heir, the one who carries the entire weight of the ancient promise in his veins, breathes his last agonizing breath and his chest stops moving. The physical body of Jesus of Nazareth is wrapped tightly in long strips of linen cloth, heavy with the sharp, overwhelming scent of myrrh and aloes. It is the word Zera. And how you understand the grammar of this one word changes how you read every single page that follows it. And carried into a tomb carved directly into the cold Judean limestone. A massive, circular stone is rolled across the entrance, the grinding of rock on rock sealing the absolute darkness inside. To the Roman soldiers standing guard, this is just another neutralized political threat. To the Pharisees, it is the successful elimination of a dangerous heretic. And to anyone reading the story purely as history, of the Offspring, injecting enough venom to stop his heart and sever the ancient bloodline once and for all. But they misunderstand the nature of what was buried, just days before he walked to the cross. Knowing the violent end was rapidly approaching, Jesus sat with his disciples and explained the mechanism of his impending death. He did not describe it as a military defeat or a tragic accident. He said, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. He was pointing directly back to the Garden of Eden, claiming the identity of the Zera. The tomb is not a grave, it is a furrow in the soil. The singular seed, fiercely protected through centuries of famine, guarded through Babylonian sieges, and hidden in the wombs of marginalized women. Zera is not a biological category. It is a singular, targeted promise. When everything falls apart, God does not throw a wide net of general solutions. Finally reaches its ultimate destination, not a gilded throne room in the capital city, but the damp, dark earth of a garden. It had to be buried, because a seed that sits safely on a shelf, untouched by the dirt and the rain, remains singular forever. It holds all the staggering potential of a harvest, but that life remains locked tightly inside a hard, impenetrable shell. To share its life, the shell has to break. The biological structure of the seed must physically fracture in the dark so that the life contained on the inside can spill out, reach into the surrounding soil, and multiply. When the physical body of the Messiah is broken on the Roman cross and buried in the ground, the strict, singular boundary of the bloodline is shattered. The exclusive, locked door of the Abrahamic covenant is blown wide open. The life of the singular heir is released, pouring out into the dust of a fractured humanity. The death of the seed is not the failure of the promise. It is the exact mechanism required to produce the harvest. But releasing the life of the seed into the ground is only the first step of the agricultural process. A shattered shell does not automatically turn weeds into wheat. How exactly does an outsider, a Roman soldier or a Greek merchant, with the wrong blood? He does not rely on a collective human effort to slowly fix the earth. He narrows the focus down to a single point, a single seed. The wrong history and the wrong genetics actually step through that broken door and get grafted into this ancient family tree. You do not earn it. You do not buy it. You do not inherit it through your parents. Paul looks at the Gentile believers in Galatia, people with the wrong DNA, the wrong history. and the wrong cultural markers, and he drops a theological bomb. For as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. He uses the language of immersion, the shock of cold water closing over your head, the lungs burning for oxygen in the dark, the sudden, violent breaking of the surface as you are pulled back into the air. In the ancient world, this was not just a religious ritual. It was a transfer of ownership. To be baptized into someone was to be entirely subsumed by their identity. It is an absolute fusion. You are legally, spiritually, and permanently placed inside the singular seed. Your history is overwritten. Your ancestry is severed. Your biological failures are instantly erased. Paul switches the metaphor in his letter to the Romans. He talks about an orchard, a sharp iron knife slicing deep into the rough bark of a wild olive branch. The wild wood is forced into the living, bleeding trunk of an ancient, cultivated tree. This is a detail that fundamentally alters how you view God's rescue operation. We are conditioned to think big. The sap from the holy root begins to flow upward, pushing life into a dead, foreign branch. Faith is not a moral achievement. It is a biological graft. You put on the identity of the Messiah, like a thick, heavy wool garment, falling over your shoulders. His resume becomes your resume. His victory over the serpent becomes your victory. His inheritance of the cosmos becomes your inheritance. This is why Paul can write the most staggering, boundary-shattering sentence in the entire New Testament. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is no male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. The dividing walls are obliterated. The genetic requirements are burned to ash. The ancient bloodline is no longer protected by biology. It is open to anyone willing to go under the water, to fall into the dirt, and to die with the seed. And if you are Christ's, Paul concludes, then you are Abraham's seed, and heirs according to promise. A Greek merchant standing in a crowded marketplace, a Roman slave shivering in the winter rain, a modern reader holding a digital screen. The moment you are hidden in Christ, you are legally recognized in the courts of heaven as the singular, chosen offspring of Abraham. We expect God to fix the world with armies, with massive nations, with sweeping political movements. But the promise spoken in the garden introduces a completely different mechanism. When the Creator looks at you, He does not see a fractured outsider. He sees the heir. He sees the seed. But to feel the absolute, overwhelming weight of what this means for your actual life, you have to look at what God built out of the dirt. The Creator walked into a fractured garden and promised a singular seed. An old man stood under a canopy of crushed diamonds, and the bloodline was guaranteed. A wicker basket floated on a river of blood, and the threads survived the empire. A royal child was hidden behind heavy temple doors, and the lineage outlasted the sword. A nation was dragged away in heavy iron chains, and the seed was preserved in the ashes. A baby cried in a cold limestone cave, and the singular heir finally arrived. The grain of wheat was buried in the dark earth, and the harvest of the cosmos was open to the world. One promise, one seed, but maybe the part that stays with me most is the dirt. Not the starry sky of Abraham, not the golden throne room of David. The dirt of the garden where the promise was first spoken, and the damp soil of the tomb where the seed was finally buried. Because a seed cannot share its life, he bypasses the crowd, ignores the multitudes. He stakes the entire future of the cosmos on one localized, hyper-specific point of impact, while it remains perfectly intact on a shelf. The shell has to fracture. The singular vessel had to break so that the wild, foreign branches of humanity could be pulled inside. If you are in a season where your life feels entirely fractured, where you feel like an absolute outsider with the wrong history, the wrong resume, and the wrong bloodline, remember the grammar of the gospel. The blessing of Eden was never given to a massive crowd of good people who earned their way in. It is hidden in one singular person, and the moment you are immersed in him, the moment you fall into the water and put on his identity, Your past is completely overwritten. If this opened something inside you, subscribe. Leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who feels like they are standing outside the gates. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. And may the God who fiercely protected a single thread through the absolute wreckage of human history carefully graft you into the living wood of his family tree and hold you there forever. Their hands clutch crude garments made of rough fig leaves, the sap still sticky and irritating against their bare skin. To feel the sheer weight of what is happening in the dirt of Eden, you have to realize that this word, Zera, is going to haunt the rest of the biblical narrative. It becomes the absolute obsession of the biblical writers. But the true nature of this word is hidden in plain sight. It acts like a locked door, keeping the full revelation of God's plan slightly out of view for centuries. And the key to unlocking it is not found in the book of Genesis. The key is found thousands of years later, hiding in the furious argument of a man writing letters across the Mediterranean. But to understand his argument, you have to watch what happens when that seed is carried out of the garden and into the dark. When modern readers open the Old Testament, they usually see a sprawling family tree. You start reading in the book of Genesis, and you almost immediately hit walls of ancient genealogies, long lists of names marching down the page in black ink, chapter after chapter of biological reproduction. We have been taught to read this as the origin story of a nation. We look at the word offspring in our English translations of the Garden Promise, and we automatically project a massive, plural reality onto it. We assume God is building an army of good people to eventually outnumber and overthrow an army of bad people. The evening wind, which used to feel like an embrace, has suddenly grown cold. They press their backs against the bark of the trees, trying to disappear. But if you read the Hebrew scriptures with that plural lens, the story feels incredibly chaotic, almost like God is failing. You see Israel fracturing, getting wiped out by empires, and repeatedly shrinking down to almost nothing. If the divine goal was biological expansion, the project looks like a catastrophic failure. But that assumption is exactly what blinds us to the underlying architecture of the text. Because the Hebrew authors are not writing a broad history. They are writing a hyper-focused tracking document. The linguistic peculiarity of the word Zera is that it functions as a collective noun. Much like the English word seed. Think about how you use that word when you are standing in a field. You can plunge your hands into a burlap sack, pull out 1,000 hard, dry kernels sliding through your fingers, and you call it seed. But you can also isolate just one, holding a single, solitary speck of life on the tip of your thumb. You also call that seed. The English translators usually look at the context of the Old Testament and default to the plural, rendering it as descendants. And in doing so, they accidentally obscure the primary tension of the entire biblical narrative. Every time you read about a sudden famine threatening a family in the book of Genesis, the stakes are higher than starvation. And then they hear it, footsteps crunching in the dirt, the unmistakable sound of their creator walking toward the wreckage of the world they just broke. Every time you read about a barren womb, the tragedy is cosmic. Every time an invading army circles Jerusalem, and you can hear the grinding of wooden siege ramps against stone walls. The tension in the text is not about whether a massive nation will survive. The Old Testament is not a record of a growing biological nation. It is the frantic, violent preservation of a single thread. The writers are pointing a spotlight at an incredibly fragile bloodline, watching it narrow down, generation after generation, as everything around it tries to sever it. The entire narrative is a story of subtraction, stripping away the multitudes to fiercely protect the one. But the place where this singular focus becomes impossible to ignore is not in a crowded city or a royal palace. It happens centuries after the garden, under an empty sky, with an old man who has nothing to his name but a goat hair tent and a barren wife. Abram steps out of the tent. The desert air bites at his skin. The camp is entirely silent. He is an old man. His wife is barren. His body is failing. He kicks the dry sand of the ancient Near East. He has gold. He has flocks. He has hundreds of servants. But he has no heir. The promise spoken in Eden feels completely dead. This is Genesis chapter 3. It is the moment the fracture happens. The moment human history spirals into exile. The womb of Zera is a closed door. The bloodline is drying up in the dust. God pulls him outside. He points to the sky. The heavens are a canopy of crushed diamonds. Thousands of stars burning in the blackness. Untouched by the dust of the earth, God speaks into the night. Look toward heaven and number the stars. If you are able to number them, so shall your offspring be. There is that word again, Zera. Most people read this moment and see a promise of sheer volume. They see a biological empire waiting to be born. They see multitudes. The stars are not a metric of population. The serpent will not sever the line. The seed will survive. And then the war begins. Isaac is born. The seed takes a breath. Then Isaac is bound on an altar. The rough wood digs into his back. The bronze knife is raised in the air. The seed is almost crushed. But a ram is caught in the thicket by its horns. The knife drops. The seed survives. Jacob flees into the wilderness. He sleeps on a cold stone. Famine stalks his children. But when God speaks into this devastation, he does not start by addressing the man. He does not start by addressing the woman. Egypt swallows the family whole. Centuries pass. Whips crack across Hebrew backs. Mud bricks are baked in the scorching sun. Pharaoh gives a terrifying, calculated order. Drown every baby boy in the Nile River. The water turns red. The screaming echoes through the reeds. This is not just political oppression. This is a targeted assassination. The serpent is trying to sever the thread. He is trying to drown the seed in the water. But a wicker basket floats. A mother hides her son. A sea is torn wide open. The seed survives. The pattern repeats. Again and again and again. Through 40 years of wandering. Through judges who bleed. Through kings who fall. Queen Athaliah seizes the throne in Jerusalem. She draws a sword. She slaughters her own grandchildren. She executes every royal heir she can find in the palace. The bloodline of David is reduced to a single infant boy. Joash, hidden in a bedroom of the temple, while the halls run red with blood. The seed hangs by a single, fragile heartbeat. But a priest locks the door. The boy breathes. The seed survives. Babylon march on Jerusalem. The wooden siege ramps are pushed against the stone walls. The temple burns. The gold melts. He turns his face toward the serpent in the dust. He pronounces a curse that will echo down the corridors of history. The massive cedar beams crash to the ash-covered floor. The royal line of David is dragged away in heavy iron chains. The kings are blinded. The throne is left completely empty. The massive nation is stripped down to a dead stump. If the promise was about a biological empire, the story ends here in the ashes. The promise was not a nation. It was a person. But to see exactly how that person was hiding in the text all along, you have to look at the exact grammar God used. Open the book of Genesis to the 12th chapter. God is speaking to Abraham, establishing the covenant that will dictate the rest of biblical history. And he says, "To your offspring, I will give this land." The word your English translation uses for offspring here is the Hebrew Zera. It appears over 200 times in the Old Testament, and its range of meaning is wider than you might expect. The noun primarily refers to the literal, agricultural seed. A farmer buries in the damp, dark soil to yield a harvest. But it also carries a secondary, metaphorical weight. It is used to describe human lineage, the biological material passed down from a father to a son. Because of this dual nature, it functions as a collective noun, and English translators almost universally default to reading it as a plural reality. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers, he will crush your head, and you will strike his heel, when it applies to humans, assuming it describes a vast, uncountable multitude of descendants. We read the English word and picture an empire, but thousands of years after Abraham, A former Pharisee named Paul is sitting in a room, the scratch of his reed pen echoing against parchment, and he makes a brilliant, explosive observation about this exact word. If seeing the hidden architecture of these ancient texts is stirring up questions you've never considered, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe, because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So Paul points his readers directly to the grammatical structure of the heavy Hebrew scrolls he had memorized in the synagogue. He is writing a letter to the churches in Galatia, and he is trying to explain how the ancient promise actually works. In Galatians chapter 3, verse 16, he writes, "Now the promises were made to Abraham, and to his offspring." It does not say, "and to offsprings," referring to many, but referring to one, "and to your offspring, who is Christ." Paul noticed what everyone else missed. He realizes that the divine author was deliberately utilizing the ambiguity of a singular noun that could look like a plural. The entire Old Testament was functioning as a funnel, narrowing the focus of history down to a single point of impact. Most people read this verse and see a general biological statement. They assume it simply means humans and snakes will never get along. The promise spoken to Abraham was not a guarantee of biological empire. It was a prophecy of a singular, incoming king. Every time the bloodline was almost severed by famine, by swords, by the muddy waters of the Nile, the cosmic tension was not about whether the nation of Israel would survive as a political entity. The tension was about whether the single seed of the Messiah would make it through the gauntlet of human history. But recognizing this grammatical key only solves half the mystery. Because if the seed is just one person, what happens to the millions of people who spent centuries walking through the wilderness? The generations march across the pages of the text. 14 generations from Abraham to David. 14 generations from David to the exile. 14 generations from the exile to the Christ. Most people skip the first chapter of Matthew because it looks like a dusty phone book. It reads like a tedious accounting of names that have no bearing on modern life. But they are not just names. They are survival markers. The genealogies are not a record of human triumph. They are a map of divine preservation. Watch the seed move through the wreckage. A woman hangs a red cord out of a window in Jericho, the rough rope burning her palms as the stone walls of the city. It looks like the serpent in the garden finally won. The beast, who was told his head would be crushed, has managed to strike the heel. They are a guarantee of preservation. God is telling Abram that the enemy will not win.